your thing doesn't work. We are studying the chapter titled The Realization of Satchidananda, Principles of Yoga, in which Sri Aurobindo is laying down the foundation for the experiential reconciliation, all the poles and extremes of this cosmos. The key that he brings us to is all of these extremes and opposite terms are only a condition for the transcendent manifest itself. And within all these conditions, them all, the thing from which they are formed is this thing that we call the Trinity, that is called Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. And he says, these are everywhere, the three inseparable divine terms. And our mind is able to separate them as distinct experiences. But the reality is that if we penetrate deep enough, all that exists and the experience of that existing consciousness is an experience of delight. And the three can never be separated truly. And so he takes us through a whole process of exploration, understand or get a glimpse of what this Satchidananda truly is. Considering that we live in a consciousness which is not only fragmented, not only superficial, not only limited, cannot know things essentially. It can only know things by some kind of separateness of observation, of a construction of images, forms, and ideas of the mind. It can never know things directly. Leads us to the Satchidananda not as a theoretical concept, but from within the experience of the human limited mind. And this is an extraordinary thing which he does. Remember, the whole theme is to be able to experience the Satchidananda. And so it won't be useful to talk about it merely as philosophical ideas. To that experientially, through the limited experience that we have, to climb all the way to that, but taking us step by step until it is built, and we can then, in our own, conceive of that ultimate state of Satchidananda. For that, there's a discussion laying down the foundations of what it is that we call consciousness. Consciousness is essentially a blissful consciousness, and it is the substance and stuff of everything that exists. Step, which he points out, is the mind can say and think, I was, but unconscious. It cannot say, I am, but unconscious. The fact that you are and that you're aware that you are is itself the awareness. You cannot say your awareness is unconscious. Of the past you can say, you can separate the two things and say, I was, but at the time I was unconscious. And so in the mind, you see, there's already a limitation that the mind can speak of consciousness and existence as separate things, but only when it looks at them from a distance of time or space. Looks at them internally as a subjective experience. If it is aware that it exists, it's consciousness. You cannot separate the two. So in this way, he immediately brings us to the recognition that although mind divides these things, in the essence of the experience, even in our mind, we cannot separate existence and consciousness. It can think and feel, but miserable and without any pleasure in existence. So we can say, I exist, I'm conscious, but I don't know what is this delight you're talking about. I only know my misery. But is only a superficial clearance. He says, in reality, this is impossible. The existence we really are, I am, of which it can never be to say it was, is nowhere unconscious. This statement begins a discussion of what is it that we mean by unconsciousness. And then he will come to the recognition that although the mind can make these practical divisions, they are not and in appearance. The first statement he makes, what we call unconsciousness, other consciousness, other than what we are used to, obviously. When we are not in this normal, that to us seems to be unconscious. He elaborates, it is the going in of this surface wave of our mental awareness of outer objects into our subliminal self-awareness and into our awareness too of other planes of existence. We are no more when we are asleep or stunned or drugged or dead than when we are plunged in inner thought, oblivious of our physical selves and our surroundings. So this is an extraordinary statement. And as we grow to its recognition, our whole concept of who we are, experience of the world, undergoes a radical change. And it is this change that we are going to explore. These two sentences we need to look at in more detail and with many examples, and to some degree draw upon the evidence of current. So the first thing he has said is, unconsciousness is only other consciousness. Compared to this, which we call conscious, this conscious thing is only surface wave of our mental awareness of outer objects. The mental awareness, not other grades of awareness. We have many grades of awareness, as we shall see. Just this band of mental awareness, that itself has many layers of depth. A surface wave. And this surface wave to outer objects. So, three layers of or limited, which define nature of what we call conscious awareness. First of all, when I say I am conscious, I mean by it, it's a mental awareness. As we will see, and even science evidences, we have other levels of awareness which are intelligent, which are constantly registering both external and internal. And not only they have intelligence, they can even follow instructions quite precisely. And so this mental self-awareness, where I say I am conscious and awake, that's a very narrow band of a much larger spectrum of gradations of awareness. And of this mental spectrum of awareness, there are further internal layers. There are many experiments now, because of the tools that we have with technology, which allow us to monitor processes that take place in the brain. In a perspective, we distinguish brain and mind. Brain is only, at best, the physical machinery through which our embodied mind is able to articulate itself. You knock out the brain, mind doesn't go away. No more plug into the body and order the body to do what it wants. It's just a translating machinery. You knock out the brain, the mind is still there, but to function, to take the command of the mind. I cannot move my hand anymore because of some damage in the brain. But we can observe in the brain the layers of the mind as they operate because most of these layers are embedded in the brain as the mind's will unfolds and activates the body. So for example, a person, while the brain is being monitored, a person is asked to make a choice between the picture on the left or the picture on the right. Yes. The moment you are conscious that you're making a choice, you push a button. There's a slight delay even in pushing a button, and take that into account in the experiment. The moment I become conscious, I am going to choose right. What's interesting to observe is while I'm undecided, one can see in the brain, which are indicating the indecisiveness. The moment I come into a decision, in the brain there is a clear registration of what it is I have decided. And so we can confirm that what we are watching in the brain is a representation of the decision. What is interesting is, before I am conscious of what I have decided, 250 milliseconds, that is a quarter of a second before, in the brain already the changes have taken place, going to become conscious that I have decided. And we can see that, and we can, a quarter second before, tell you what you have decided to, or what you're going to decide in your free choice. So the question really for the was, does this mean we don't have free choice? Are we just machines? And are we just tapping deeper into the machinery? From a yogic perspective, we would say that is the wrong conclusion. The right conclusion is mind itself has many layers. The part where we say I am self-aware and I'm making the free choice is the superficial layer. To make that choice of which one I will take, there are these deeper layers from where the original sense of the choice originates, the conscious part, and when it kicks into the conscious part, that's when I become conscious that, this is what I am choosing. But in the brain's processes, I am able to detect those deeper layers and their operations. Just one example, many such experiments today show us layers inside the brain where we can see how things happen. There is another series of experiments which go much more in the direction of what we would call psychic powers, paranormal abilities of the brain, of the mind, and even this can be detected in the working of the mind and in the brain. That you're shown images, for example, images are flashed before you at random. Most of the images are, every once in a while at random, the computer pops up a shocking, disturbing, emotionally painful image. When the image flashes, of course, immediately there's a reaction in the emotions, there's a reaction in the brain, and heart rate goes up, your skin resistance, perspiration, etc. modifies. The brain shows violent disturbance of thoughts and emotions. What is interesting is, a few moments before the picture is flashed, already begun to react. It's as if innate to all of us in our mind is the ability to sense a shock that is about to come. And in these deeper layers of our own mind, we are as if aware of the imminent future. And that awareness is able to sense when the imminent future is going to be shocking, and already begins to brace for the shock, or rather begins to react to the shock, even before that imminent future is physically manifested. And remember, the computer is making this choice at random. Inside the computer, the circuitry, which is electronic logic, which is going to make a choice, is not making the choice until that moment where the picture is being flashed. So this thing which is sensing is not sensing electronics, sensing something which is behind the electronics, where already the choice is imminent. There are other variations of such experiments. This is of course showing you a reaction in the brain. Other variations with 100 years ago, there were many explorations of paranormal abilities. People would be asked to predict which playing card would be turned up. And they would ask to note, and then the card would be opened. Again, they would ask to note the next, and so on. Often, scientists found some correlations, some guesses, we might say, mostly lots of misses. But having done many studies, one of the researchers observed in time the position of the cards and predictions, then the matches were much higher, dramatically higher. In other words, while I'm trying to predict the next card which is up on the surface, and I'm correct maybe time, in reality, I'm correct for the second card after that 50 or 60% of the time. In other words, my attempt to what the next card is, my attempt itself is somehow clouding my perception. There's a deeper perception which knows, and since I'm not attempting the card after the next, that is sensing that one and already registering that as the one which is to be next. It seems as if the surface operating mind is much more a screen and a disturbance to the deeper knowings of the inner layers of mind. And those layers we are able to sense, we are able to validate, and we find in the validation beyond the apparent physical senses. So what we call normal consciousness is only mind, only on the surface of the full depth of the mind itself. Further limitation, the part which is turned outwards. He says, mental awareness of outer objects. If you ask somebody, are you aware? How do you know? Well, because I can see the world. I'm conscious that I'm seeing these things. When my eyes close, a kind of a daydream, and somebody shakes me out of it. Sorry, I think I fell asleep. I think I was not conscious. I didn't hear what you said. I was not aware. So my definition of awareness is I'm registering things outside. And when I lose that registration, then I think I'm not aware. So what we call unconsciousness is simply other consciousness. It is the going in of this surface wave of our mental awareness of outer objects. The surface wave of mental awareness of outer objects, 3 levels of limitation, is now turning in. The first limitation is going within. And what happens there? Into our subliminal self-awareness and into awareness too of other planes of existence. So the first breaking away from this limitation is the inward turn, where many layers of the mind's awareness exist. Second break of the limitation would be other planes, other grades, not just of this narrow band of awareness. And he'll be discussing all of these in our own subjective experience. And implied is the third. In turning inwards, I am no more attached to external objects. I can become aware of things within me, my emotions, my dreams, my fantasies. In my dreams and fantasies, I can construct which may have no correspondence with things outside. And so this child sitting in the classroom enters the daydream, and in his internal consciousness is constructing, and as he builds As the animals there, gentle, loving, friendly. As in that world, the trees are perhaps conscious and can communicate. And when you're hungry, their branches bend down and give you the ripe fruits. And the birds come and sit on your hands. They sing to you. And as he lives in this world, suddenly there is this harsh call which pulls him out to so-called, quotes, reality. The teacher shouts at him, "Are you daydreaming again?" Now, which is the real experience? We are taught as children, all that in your daydream is fantasy, not real. Stop this, close this, again and again. And the result is many of these experiences very quickly subside. Often we find children have not only experiences of things within and of other planes, they may also have many what we would categorize as paranormal experiences. They sense things which are going to happen. They the limits of the physical senses. They may experience going out of the body, flying and wandering around. But each time that the shock pulls you back and you're told this is false, this is wrong, cut it out, to suppress. And then we are taught to get bound and stuck in the surface wave, a narrow band of awareness, to a degree that as adults, we have locked ourselves so tightly into this that even if we are reminded of those experiences, we struggle to remember them because we've buried them as unreal, false. So, a turning inward into our subliminal self-awareness and to our awareness too of other planes of existence. This our awareness of other planes is suggesting, in the way he words it, that already within us there is an innate awareness of many planes, which we are not on the surface conscious. When we're about to meet somebody, and especially remember that inner part of the mind which can sense things, especially if the going to happen is going to be unpleasant, there is automatically something inside which is tensing, which is bracing, preparing, foreboding. We may even convince ourselves later that because we had a bad interaction, or perhaps because I knew we were going to have a bad interaction, I was anxious. But in the emotions, my mind had no justification for that disturbance. So it's as if on another level I have sensed things. We'll come to these when we discuss further other gradations within us. He discusses how many of the things which exist in the plant and animal life are also operative within us. We'll see those examples later. The distinction between the outwardly turned consciousness and the vividness and the reality of this inwardly turned consciousness, that distinction poses for us many deep questions. We have on another occasion spoken of the famous story of a king who dreamt that he was a butterfly, a vivid dream. On waking up, he had a problem. And he asked his wise men, was I the king dreaming that I am a butterfly? Or am I the butterfly dreaming that I am the king? Which one is the reality? And the answer for us from the yogic perspective is they are all different layers of the reality. It's not that one is real and that the other is unreal. To an extraordinary statement of Sri Aurobindo, you'll find this in the Life Divine, where it says that there is no such thing as hallucination or fantasy or imagination which is unreal. Things are real on their own proper planes or in their own parts of our consciousness. Even when you think you're hallucinating under the influence of some or drugs, what you're seeing actually exists in a certain plane, in a certain level or part of consciousness of the cosmos. And so there is nothing which is not real. Even the fantasy that the child created in his daydream, his personal fantasy, will be different from my daydream of an ideal world. That is a reality in the mental consciousness in that particular level in which he dreams or even in which he creates it. It is a real experience, a reality in the cosmos. So we have to now everything is real. What the objective physical reality is only a very narrow part of the total reality and is, or the small part which is part of what we may call a shared experience, in the sense that all of us would agree that this thing is a yellow colored flower. And yet there will be occasionally some people who will say, no, it's not yellow. We will examine their eyes and we will tell them, well, it looks like your retina has a defect. You have a rare genetic abnormality, therefore you can't see yellow. Perhaps. The deeper exploration shows you, same person who says this is yellow can be put under hypnosis and can be instructed hereafter, you will see all yellow as red. And this person will now say, the rose is yellow. When out of the hypnosis, it's as if inside his mind swapped. And the effect continues after the hypnosis is removed, which makes us wonder, what is it that makes us all see the same yellow or the same red? If within each of our minds, association of the color can be changed so easily, what is it that makes it part of the common experience? There is an answer to that. Minds are a part of one shared cosmic mind. It is the shared cosmic mind that sees this as yellow and the other as red. And it in the wave or limited part of that cosmic mind which is separated out and which we identify as our separate mind, we share the common experience. Whose cosmic mind? The cosmos's cosmic mind sees this, or rather sees itself in this as red rose, sees itself in that as yellow flower. It is possible for me to modify and twist, and therefore under hypnosis one can do that, and my experience of the world changes. All of these show us the complexity of this whole domain, which we are now. The question still remains, that makes this shared experience? The shared experience, as we have seen, is largely common. We all say, yes, this is yellow, a few exceptions. Someone is colorblind, someone is hypnotized into flipping colors, but otherwise we all say this is a shared experience. Except who says, I don't know what is color. And that is just a clue. The experience that we are having, the experiences we are having is already of a very narrow band of consciousness. Because blind people are rare, sight is normal, or the limited sight we have is normal. Therefore, say, yellow is or color is a shared experience. In a world where people are blind, 1 in a million can see, color would be out of the world, extraordinary, abnormal or paranormal or transnormal, whatever the way we choose to look at it. And therefore, we can speculate that within what we call this shared experience, there are further layers currently unable to register. And somebody in whom that higher perception is developed may see more in it, which is not shared currently. So shared experience only represents a narrow band of common evolutionary development. That too in matter where form is rigid. Being rigid can offer us an objective experience. The moment you shift to other levels of the planes of consciousness where form is fluid, you may look at the same thing in the vital world and describe it differently than I would in terms of form. In terms of quality of consciousness and energetic quality, we would describe the same thing. This has a soothing, healing character. That has a brightening and uplifting quality of vibration, and so on. When the mother, she was looking at them not by their form, their vital energy, and not by their mental idea, but going to the essence behind all this, the psychic essence, and describing that quality of its pure consciousness. But because that quality of its pure consciousness projecting into the physical domain, a natural characteristic form of that vibration, therefore you will see in the form a reflection of that quality of consciousness. So this particular flower, the mother named Immortality. In fact, it's one of the few flowers, probably the only flower that I'm aware of. It just dries and doesn't lose color. You do not know from a fresh one and a dry one. It is practically, in physical terms, immortal. But it is because in its essential vibration, in the origin of the flowerness of the flower form, that quality of consciousness exists. The form only represents that. For all the other flowers, there's a flower called Collective Harmony, and you'll see a bunch of many flowers beautifully arranged, and so on. Which tells us that our shared experience of the physical objective world is only the most superficial crust of a huge multi-layered underlying reality. And so when we turn inwards, it's as if we're beginning to explore more of this hidden experience of reality, at which point we have gone outside the domain of the normal shared experience. And for the mass of humanity which is still stuck in that superficiality, you are now in paranormal, abnormal, subliminal, superconscious, subconscious, whatever name you may give to it. But not normal, not waking, not aware. So we are going to now free ourselves from that limited understanding and look at the full scope of what's possible. And he describes this inward turning movement as the going in of this surface wave of our mental awareness of outer objects. In other words, what was turned outwards as a surface wave turns inwards and begins now to explore into our subliminal self-awareness. So first thing we experience when we turn in is we are aware of ourselves. Where? My feelings, my thoughts, what kind of a person am I? And turning in, I realize, oh my God, right now I'm a little disturbed, I'm agitated, I'm tense. What is it about? What is it that's making me tense? And I realize, oh yes, about 5 hours ago, I had received a message about something distressing. I've even forgotten about it, but the tension of that the message caused is still there inside me as a layer. And it is still influencing my thoughts and my behavior on the surface. I'm able to hold my concentration in my activity because of that tension, which I'm not even conscious of. And now I've become conscious of it. When I've become conscious of it, I had to struggle to find its root cause. There somewhere as an idea, as a memory, as an emotional knot impacting. It's as if one begins first to become aware of ourselves and layers with us, of which we're normally utterly unaware. The second thing which emerges from there, and into awareness too, it's almost as if a secondary thing. Not everybody gets to that easily. Awareness too of other planes of existence. When planes of the inner layers begin to become more and more vividly accessible to us, when we begin to live in there as much as in the outer, we may find it easy to experience other levels and other deeper realities also. But these two follow one after another. Then he says, this condition where we are turned inwards and so no more conscious in the normal sense, he says, we are really no more unconscious when we are asleep or stunned or drugged or dead or in any other state that we might call unconscious, than when we are plunged in inner thought, oblivious of our physical selves and our surroundings. Now, this is an extraordinary statement. What he's saying is, when that child was in intense daydream, he's plunged in inner thoughts. First, all your awareness is turned inwards. Second, you are oblivious of the physical self, conscious of your body. And third, you're oblivious of the surroundings. So any time that you're in that kind of an inner thought, oblivious of your physical self and of your surrounding, you are equivalent in consciousness state to sleep, stunned, or dead. Now, this is an extraordinary statement. And if we recognize the full import of this, never again look at dead as we used to before. We will never look at drugged, stunned, or asleep also in the same way as we have currently. Effectively, you are in profound daydream, if you may use that as the common term. But what are its characteristics? First, your full attention is inside. But second, he says, not conscious of the physical self. In other words, your inside has to be detached from the gross body and its sensations. I am still conscious of myself as thoughts or as other gradations, but not body. Why? Because the moment you're conscious of body, you're also conscious through it of the physical world. So here you're cut off from the body and you're cut off naturally from the external environment. In such a state, if somebody were to prick you, feel the prick. If there is a loud sound, you would not hear it. Even if your eyes are open, what is shown before you. Now, all these are common in deep daydream. But they are also common to the other experiences which we have described as asleep, stunned, drugged, or dead, if asleep, stunned, or drugged is deep enough. Dead, it's obvious, it's as if you've gone too deep. Now, what is it that's common among these and what is it that's different among all these? He said, or any other state. What are the other states? Other states would include hypnosis. It could include some kind of deep daydream. It could include a state of anesthetic, partial, local, or general. So what is it that makes all of these similar and what makes them all different? So we'll just briefly look at each of these and consider what they represent from a yogic perspective. So when we are asleep, you notice what happens at the time when the sleep begins. We have just had a late dinner. We're having a conversation. Suddenly everybody begins to yawn. They are droopy. And then after a while, somebody starts dozing off. And he's struggling to keep his eyes open and listen. And he may force his eyes to remain open. But if you observe subjectively what happens when you try to force yourself to remain asleep, momentarily you blank out. Again, you find yourself blanking out and snapping back. You're struggling. What is it that's pulling you into that state of blanking out? What is it that's pushing your normal consciousness, which is self-aware, turned outwards, is the part pushing. And it's as if against it something is pulling, and the direction of the pull is a kind of an interiorization. And with the interiorization, the closing of the eyes. It's interesting how it works when you observe carefully. You can stay awake when the eyes blink. There's as if a momentary loss, and at that time, it catches you, and you stay asleep, and suddenly snap out. It says reopening. What's happening there? It's very interesting to observe in the brain studies. If you observe the brain working, thinking, you can see processes happening in different parts of the brain. You're observing, you're asked to take some decisions based on things on the screen, use your fingers, etc. At the moment of the blink, entire brain's awareness shuts down and then snaps back in. Flash, 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 shut on, shut on, shut on. As a result, we are utterly unconscious of the blink itself. If your mind was active and the physical part of the mind attached to the brain was active at that time, you would register the blink itself. I'm watching and the blink is coming in the way. During the blink, I'm as if lost. I'm unable to register the continuity of my sight or my thought or my action. But it happens quickly enough. It's not enough that it's quickly. It happens quickly enough along with the shutting down of registration during the flash that your mind does not register it. And this we can watch in the brain. Now what that means, of the blink, as if something in the very machinery of the brain kicks in, blocks the awareness, kicks out, just to maintain the sense of continuity. That's the time when the force that is pulling you into deep sleep catches you. A moment of unconsciousness, it catches you and tugs you in, and you've gone into sleep. The blink is that transition point. What is it doing when it's pulling you into sleep? You will see your machinery of brain working to be outwardly turned is shutting down. It shuts down eventually to such a degree that you have no more registration of things outside. But what happened meanwhile? In the layers behind, which were always there, which were always active, they have not been shut down. In the parts of the consciousness not attached to the brain, down, and things still continue, disengaged from the outer senses. At that time, what happens? Spontaneous memories arise, associations arise, and they join, they blur, they merge, they trigger other associations, and that whole general melee of confused mixtures is what we recollect later as dream. If you've ever observed the process of your mind falling asleep, you will notice this, because it's possible to be conscious up to a point before the full depth of sleep kicks in. And at that point you will notice, I was thinking of what I want to do tomorrow. The whole thought gets warped and drifts into a different direction, wandering, blurring, step out of it. Hey, I was thinking of this, and I bring my thought back. That movement of blurring, it's as if some associated emotions or ideas begin to fill and overwhelm, as if layers come over my thinking and break the sequence and replace it by other unconnected images or thoughts. And that's how we slide into dream states. This is normal as our consciousness goes within. This is the reason why when first people are taken into an interiorized state, almost indistinguishable from a sleep-like state. But of course, with the practice of meditation or any form of interiorization, where you discipline the mind to be able to its own imaginary worlds, if you do it in a disciplined way, then you can maintain the continuity more easily. So this is as regards sleep. The actual process of sleep kicking in is almost outside your physical control. It's in the biology itself, as the releases melatonin, a series of processes follow, and other hormones, chemicals kick in, which begin to make you, pull you into sleep state. Next term he uses is stunned. Now, in the stunned state, none of these natural processes of the biology are pulling you in. At that point, it may be a shock, physical or emotional. A knock on the head, stunned, the person is unconscious. And then after about 30 seconds, when everybody is panicking, suddenly the person opens the eyes and is totally unaware. 30 seconds, he thinks the in-between passage was like the blink. I bumped my head, I blinked, I opened, and I find I'm on the floor. How did that happen? So you can see the similarity with the sleep passage. The difference, of course, is it happened by a physical shock. At that point, the inner layers of the mind consciousness, as if to protect, pulled back and shut down so that you do not have too much of an intense trauma. A similar process happens when you have very strong physical, emotional traumas. Something pulls back and dissociates from the strong experience. If it is to such a degree that you might even lose memory of it or vaguely remember, in my childhood, I have that vague memory that something like that happened. I'm not even sure if it was a dream or if it was real. And of course, the adults will confirm, oh yes, that was a very traumatic experience. But is your own consciousness as if to stun and block. But the intelligence involved, which knew what needs to be, when you need to pull away, for how long and when to bring back the awareness, that intelligence was conscious. In other words, the inner layers not only are conscious, not only they are intelligent, they are instantly able to act with precision. The third is drugged. Many kinds of drugs, and we may perhaps take the example of an anesthetic. Well, no, let's set that aside. We take a drug where, as a result of the infusion of a psychedelic drug, you begin to see things, hallucinate, or experience altered states of awareness. What's happening? Example Sri Aurobindo, or the vocabulary that Sri Aurobindo uses, when a person has ingested drugs of these types, this is suddenly thrown into the vital world or into the vital layer. But what has happened is, your registration is still in the physical body, your eyes and physical senses are still turned outwards, but the inner senses and their perception of the vital world are now overlays on top of this. The domains of the vital world and the physical world are as if overlaid and therefore blurred. You cannot distinguish between this and that. And the result is perception. This flower now suddenly begins to get up and walk away. And to you, that is a physical reality, whereas others in the room don't share that physical reality. You may then start to catch the flower as it runs around, and people will say, oh, this fellow's gone mad, or he's seeing things, he's hallucinating, or whatever the nature. It's an overlay of another reality, level of reality with the physical. You cannot distinguish one from the other. And this may involve also shifts of states of consciousness, experiencing intense emotions which overwhelm you, experiencing some states of identification with everything around you, which disorients you, and so on. Primary registering consciousness is still the surface, mind. And so it's a tiny piece meeting something immense and getting overwhelmed. The layer which you experience corresponds to the state of consciousness you were in, or the layer that the drug opens naturally within your consciousness. Some drugs are opening more in the domains of the lower vital, some in the higher vital, some approaching parts of the mental consciousness. And so the character of the experiences vary by drug, but also by the initial state that you were at. So skilled who uses those drugs to give you an experience of other levels of reality takes pains to direct your awareness to a particular grade before the drug itself is given. That way he leads you into the level that he wants to take you in. If not, you may just find yourself exposed helplessly to some of the lower levels, experience beings of the lower vital world which can be extremely dangerous and harmful, be overwhelmed by them and unable to escape. If the same thing happened in the dream state, where a lot of your consciousness went out and was attacked, instantly that inner intelligence would pull back and bring you back into the physical body, and the dulling blocks from access to those things, and you are safe. And those things can no more harm you. But in the state of the drugs, artificially the barriers have been removed, you are overwhelmed and unable to manage. And sometimes it can leave a lasting damage, scar, or even distortion in the subtle layers of your consciousness. Sometimes even a being may gain entry into your consciousness, lodge it inside. Single experience of the drugs, you may find for the rest of your life, you're harassed by either some voices or by some persistent negative suggestions, ideas, and things like that, which you may think are your own, but are actually of a force which has got into you and is now creating mischief inside. So these are all risky things, but you understand the principle there is still similar to the interiorized state of awareness. The experience is not fundamentally different, at least in the beginning. We'll take an extreme case where we know that during the wars on the battlefield, people are moving around with their guns. Suddenly they hear a loud explosion, boom. They don't know the explosion was close by, and the intensity of it just blasted out their body, gross body. But remember, we are made of all these layers of consciousness. Only the gross body is knocked out by the blast. Everything else is intact. You felt no pain, it happened so fast. There was no time for registration of the pain in the nervous system. You didn't even hear the blast, because before you could register the blast, the machinery that would register it was knocked out. In the case of a nuclear explosion, your body is vaporized even before you know anything. What happens to the rest of you which is still intact? Thinking you're in the physical body, and you find soldiers running around, hiding, scared. For no reason at all, they find themselves overwhelmed with strong, intense fears or strong, intense passions. And suddenly the experience has become much more emotionally intense, and they don't realize why, until either eventually those layers of the lowest vital begin to break apart, and they begin to realize something is wrong, because every time I expect something, it happens. Something is wrong, reality has changed. They themselves awaken to it over time. Or there are lots of helpers in the subtle worlds who come, especially in these war zones, to help, who will tell you, you know, you're dead. So now you better move on. Stop this battle. You don't need to have the war. And the fellow had an injury before, he was limping, and he's still walking with his limp. And he's told, your foot is all right. At first he doesn't believe. And you say, well, try to walk straight. And he finds he can walk straight because his body, subtle body, is intact. And so there's a whole process of accepting now and overcoming this sudden disorientation and moving on. But the passage is as simple as that. Physical access, the access to the physical world is suddenly removed, and that's it. The process of that removal, of course, may be long, slow by illness or so, or it may be rapid, or it may be even conscious. You choose simply to withdraw yourself as you would in a deep meditation. Your attention draws back from the body. Say, okay, that's it. Now I don't come back. And you cut the link. It could be as simple as that, which is what happens in the cases of yogis. So you will see in many cases, great yogis form everybody and go into what they call Jivita Samadhi, that is living Samadhi. They sit cross-legged and then consciously withdraw. And depending on their choice, they may either withdraw and the body is then shut, or at the time of withdrawal, they may choose to leave in the body a certain imprint of their will. In certain Buddhist traditions, they use the power of their tapas, dissolve the body, dematerialize it. And either there is no body left, or there's a pile of ash, or it takes the form of flowers if they choose to transmute during dematerialization. And these experiences are seen as miraculous. But essentially, they all involve the same gradually withdrawing and then dealing with the body in the best way that you can or choose to from that state. Even they may leave an imprint that the body will not disintegrate. The person will go away, the soul goes away, but the imprint may remain enough that the body remains plastic, supple. There are a few cases like that you may have heard of in the media. So in all of those cases, the common factor is the consciousness is now turned away from this surface wave of mind turned to outer senses and is now free to explore all other levels, including other planes. In case of a general anesthetic, you are following initially a process similar to what kicks in sleep. The gas injected in the blood is triggering off similar processes, certain senses, processes of the brain and the nervous system slow down and dull enough that the surface consciousness is blocked and the consciousness released. Depending on the degree of the anesthetic, you might find yourself in a sleep-like state, half dreaming, half conscious, but not conscious of the physical world, just conscious of yourself. You may even experience continuity of consciousness from the time I was given anesthetic. I'm aware about half an hour has passed, and then I start waking up. Or if it is too strong, it might push you into a deep sleep state, where you may have dream-like experiences, but if it's deep enough, you don't remember the dream. Or it may throw you out of the body in your subtle form, find yourself floating over the operating table, wandering around the hospital, looking at things, observing things. In many versions of this phenomena, they put at the top, near the ceiling, on the top of a cupboard, some numbers or some pictures which can only be seen from the top. So when the person comes back to waking consciousness and says, oh, I was conscious, I heard you speak, they can verify, oh yeah, what was the picture you saw? Because nobody from the ground eye level can see those. And that's one way of validating that it was a real out-of-body experience. But here's the interesting thing. You can push and push and push with the anesthetic. There's a point where if you cross the threshold in the anesthetic, the person may enter so deep that he does not have the thread to recover, the thread of awareness. He's so lost, so disengaged from the gross body, he doesn't know anymore how to come back. And then the person remains in a coma. So the skill of the anesthetic is to push you out enough from the gross body that you will not register the pain of the surgery, but not allow you to be pushed so deep that you lose the link, or from the lack of the continuity of consciousness, the biology starts breaking down. There is brain damage. Because the moment consciousness withdraws to that degree, there's no support for the life force to continue its automatic processes. And so that's the fine line that they have to keep vigilant for. This is a very different experience and a fascinating experience because it exposes so much of our inner potential that we consider to be normally impossible or paranormal or abnormal. As I said, under hypnosis, you can even make you see different things, different colors. But much more than that, you're able to tap into layers of the inner mind, inner vital, even the inner physical. And the process does not involve any drugs. And that's what makes it so fascinating. It can be under conscious control, not of yourself, but somebody else. You could also do it to yourself as a self-hypnosis. But in the case of hypnotism, the other person imposes his will on you. And by the application of his will, pushes you to some kind of an interiorized state. Immediately the surface layer of the body as if falls asleep. Someone comes in and says, sleep. And the head goes down, the body slumps. Even the person may fall down if the state is deep enough. The hypnotist may then lead you deep enough that many strange things become possible. And all of these have been validated conditions. Under hypnosis, you can be told things which then happen to you spontaneously when you wake up. Stage performance, somebody is told, under hypnosis, the hypnotist will say, every time I pull my right earlobe, you will start singing the national anthem. So he pulls his right earlobe, the person starts singing. And then he's sent back in the audience, he has no memory. So you're told, post-hypnotic suggestion, you will not remember what I said. And in the midst of the whole performance, the man pulls his right ear, and this person in the audience will stand up and start singing. Everyone starts laughing. And he looks at them and says, why are you laughing? I'm singing the national anthem. Isn't that a good thing? If you ask him the justification for his abnormal behavior, his mind has convinced itself that it's the right thing to do, and he cannot see anything odd about it. Of the mind's power of self-deception. You could be made to do things absolutely ridiculous. So I've seen examples of this in videos where the person is told, whenever I pull my earlobe, you will go and start playing the drum on somebody's head. Or you will get up and start doing cartwheels and all kinds of weird behavior, bark like a dog, etc. And the person actually does it. And if you ask him, why are you doing this? He's so convinced to himself that this is the normal thing to do, he cannot understand. And what this shows you is your surface mind naturally capable of justifying anything to itself, automatically, effortlessly. So when an impulse comes from inside and the post-hypnotic suggestion is popping up from that inner layer, suddenly I feel the urge to bark like a dog and go on my knees. I justify that urge myself. I start behaving in that strange way. And when somebody asks me, I get upset. How dare you question something which is so right? Until the hypnotist comes and says, oh, it's okay, we gave it to you as a post-hypnotic suggestion. And then you watch the face of the man, he's totally confused. Because he had just convinced himself that this was the right behavior. It's not. And there's this whole period of adaptation through confusion. Unfortunately, all of us, hypnotic suggestions, have all kinds of crazy impulses coming up, which we justify to ourselves all the time. You see, if simple thing, you are asked, what do you want to have for dinner? What do? You turn in whatever the first impulse that comes up, or the strongest impulse that comes up, you accept that, I want to have this. But because it is legitimate, you've been asked, you don't see anything strange in it. But if you were a rational person, and you're asked, why did you pick this? I don't know, it's the impulse that came up. At that moment, even without a post-hypnotic suggestion, if the person asking the question has a strong thought, I want to eat this, that is what will seize you, and you will say, I want this. You see? we are actually puppets of impulses emerging not only from within us, but most of them entering from outside and then emerging from within. And we think we are free. We think we do because we want to do. Bulk of our freedom, even our thoughts, our emotions, are things coming in from outside, invading us. Because they pop up from inside, we claim them as ours, free choice. And it takes a sufficient inner awakening and purification to be able to distinguish between the two. I will share with you an interesting incident. I was with a businessman friend in Delhi. He was being in business, seeking some kind of certainty through astrology. He himself studied astrology. And one day he told me, I have found the best astrologer. He can tell you things down to the hour. I was a little surprised because that's not how astrology works. Of course, you can do anything, but that's not how it works. So anyway, he insisted that I meet him. He arranged for that meeting to take place. We were traveling in the car. This man was good in the sense he had read a lot. It was weird. He would take the chart. From the chart, there is a particular derived thing which is called the Navamsha, which is the ninth split. Upon that, he would impose the current planetary positions. Into that, he would make some modification to the current hour until it's such a huge confusion that there's logic to it left. He would feel and say, this. You see what's happening at that point? There's no logic, there's no mathematics, there's no astrology. He's created such a nice confusion that what he feels pops up is what he can catch and justify it in the name of astrology. Many astrologers do that. They use a kind of an instinct or intuition, and that's how they get their accuracy. So my friend then told him, looking at me, to guess the ascendant. Now the ascending sign often determines the overall form of your body. So a tall person, you can say, guess his ascendant. And the moment he asked the question, I was curious to see, is he just following some system or is it just that intuitive or instinctive thing? So in my mind, I put a strong idea of sign number 6. And this man hummed hard and then said 6. And my friend was very upset because if you apply basic logic, sign number 6 ascendant cannot be a tall person. Again, he said, no, come on, you can't be so foolish. Try again. So again, I held in my mind a strong 6. Again, he said 6. My friend was disappointed. He said, how can you do that? The only 2 signs which can be tall are other numbers. Then I confessed. I said, no, it was my mistake. I was just trying to see what he was doing. And it was obvious the man was not doing astrology. He was just picking up your thoughts, your fears, your impulses, reflecting them back. And that's how he would be able to tell you what's happening or about to happen. Mostly matching your expectations and impressing you. But my point in giving this example is, you don't need hypnosis. Most of the time we are living as somnambulists. We are ourselves self-hypnotized, lost in our some kind of a impulsively driven life, semi-conscious. And this is very useful for advertisers in the industry. They depend on this. They use this, they leverage it even in advertisements. If you observe carefully the whole science of advertising, how advertisements are designed, especially visual advertisements, they use extraordinary tricks of hypnosis to suggest to you to behave in certain ways. They literally plan to build an entire generation of human beings tailored to the behavior that they want to inculcate in you. If you look at India in the last 20 years, our breakfast habits have been reshaped completely, from traditional foods to things which at some time we would never have believed could become the norm. And it was all done through advertisements, through television. And one of the things with television, which advertisers use so much, why they pay in millions to be able to get a few seconds on the television when there are people watching, especially when there are strong, intense, emotional circumstances of matches, football matches, cricket matches. Not during a program of music. Even if 1 million people watch a music program, it's not interesting for the advertisers. They catch you when your emotions are most intense and your intellectual discriminating faculties are dulled. That's when they can put your post-hypnotic suggestion in you. Then they put the advertisement, all of them intended to build on that excitement and nudge in certain ways and put the suggestion inside. The suggestions done so skillfully, we don't have time to go into examples of that, but take it simply as this, they are post-hypnotic suggestions. And so a large part of humanity today is living on post-hypnotic suggestions drilled into you through advertisements, through your school textbooks, through your social programming. And these are the things which bind humanity. You'll see in every country where you have had a despotic leader, the first thing they want to control is the media. The second thing they want to control is your educational textbooks. Because that's the way they can program a whole generation. And the whole future of humanity is being, so to say, set by these programmed patterns. And they're all designed to make you submissive and obedient followers, not leaders. The elite in humanity who want their children to become leaders do not put them through those conventional schools. They have their elite schools where they're given a very different kind of education intended to build self-inquiry, independent thought, leadership, and so on. But with a slant to make you an elite, separate from others, whom you have to rule, etc. And this is what has brought humanity to such a big mess. I'm digressing a little bit, but it's worth recognizing that hypnosis is actually happening to us most of the time. We're all living semi-hypnotized lives because simply we don't dare to be conscious. The moment you become conscious, that you're conscious, that's the starting point. I'm conscious that I'm aware. Suddenly you have a choice. You're not conscious that you're aware, you don't have a choice. You do what is the next impulse that pops up within you. Life is very simple. But the moment you're conscious that you're conscious, suddenly you're conscious of your choices and the consequences of each choice. And every choice has positive and negative consequences. How do you choose? Self-interest. Useful for me, short term. That's generally the starting point. But when you're conscious in your higher parts, that's no more acceptable. And it creates some disequilibrium at first. You have to start revaluing all your priorities, all your references, and all these things, all the rest follows inevitably. But that's when your real human life begins. Until then, you're in a semi-human, somnambulist, half asleep living. A large part of your consciousness is still kind of in a daydream. If you observe people working at home in a routine, many housewives or maids sweeping the floor, preparing food, or going through a routine which they have gone through for many years, observe them carefully. Their whole consciousness is turned inward in some kind of daydream. And the body is going on mechanically. They're half asleep. It's only when you're thrown in a situation which is challenging, unexpected, suddenly there's a shock and part of the consciousness pops back in and continues in this somnambulism. But it's not different from people who go to office and live their own routine of life. It's just that they have more complex thoughts, complex emotions, which look like they're more self-aware, but they're still bound to the same routine of the habit. Somnambulists of a different grade. And when you have this self-aware thought, you say, why am I doing this? And that can create big problems. When the September 11th attacks took place on the Twin Towers, these two Twin Towers represented the epitome of modern capitalist people there. They were in their early 20s. They were making deals involving billions of dollars every day. Trading, stocks, numbers, paper, all of it fake. Until the whole thing collapsed. Billions of dollars. And they were immature children almost. They were just doing a job. They were asked to do this, which manipulations led to profits for their company. And that was all. Driven with an obsession. And when those attacks took place and those survived, bulk of them, were in such a shock. Many of them who had made enough money left that business, went to live in the countryside or following some hobby or some ideal of what they always wanted to do in their life. It was interesting to observe the shock, the effect of the shock. The shock suddenly brought them face to face with their own death, which was so close. And it made them question, what is this life about? What do I really want? If tomorrow I could have just died from this attack, would I have been worthwhile in my life? What would I really wanted to have done? And immediately that introspection brought a priority of what was important to their deeper parts. They had the money, they switched. Others switched to jobs to something else closer to what they were doing because they didn't have enough money and so on. But the shock was interesting. And in this way, the shock is often what snaps you out from the hypnosis of the rat race that you've been programmed to live. I see people completing their education, and when I ask, so what are you doing? What are you going to do? I look for a job. What would you like to do as a job? I don't know. I'll have to see what jobs come my way. So they're not even thinking of what they want or what to them means something meaningful. It's just, that's the thing to do. You complete your education, you get into whatever job comes, you keep hopping grade scale. And that's about it. Even if you hate the job, you're chasing the money because you were programmed to do that. It's strange that very few people stop and say, I don't care if I get a high-paying job. I want to do something which I enjoy. Because it's as if everything in the societal programming says you're a fool if you do that. Okay, so this is all elaborating on the state of hypnosis to show you that you do not need a special hypnotic condition. We are already half hypnotized. But what's happening at the time? You're living in some kind of inner mechanical, slightly interiorized mechanical event of thought, impulses, drives. So all of these are unconscious states, normally referenced, but he says they are no more unconscious than somebody who is in a deep daydream, in this way, oblivious to physical selves. Now, finally, one state we have not touched is meditation. And so he comes to this directly. He says, for anyone who has advanced even a little way in yoga, this is the most elementary proposition and one which offers no difficulty whatever to the thought, because it is proved at every point by experience. The nature of the yogic path is that at every point your experience is a deepening of your consciousness or a heightening of your consciousness or an unveiling of a layer within you that you were unaware of, subliminal or subconscious, recognizing that there are so many layers behind layers and impulses from those affecting us, being able to either influence those layers, purify them, modify them, or otherwise. And all of this is really the domain of yoga. The most obvious form of that awareness is in some form of deep meditation, where you deliberately turn your attention inwards, deliberately withdraw from the surface, and you deliberately explore deeper and higher levels and experience them as distinct grades or domains of reality of yourself. So for that, for people a little advanced, even a little advanced in the yoga, this is obvious. It is more difficult to realize, now he goes on with the logic of the discussion. This is to show that there's no such thing which is unconsciousness. All is consciousness, only other consciousness, different level of consciousness. That is easy to recognize now with this very simple description and logic. It is more difficult to realize that existence and undelight of existence cannot go together. So we have seen that if you exist, you're conscious, differently conscious perhaps. But if you're existing and you're conscious, you're not in delight, you're in pain, you're suffering. How is that an illusion? Can you recognize that there is actually a delight which is associated with the consciousness? And this part is more difficult, he says. What we call misery, grief, pain, absence of delight is again merely a surface wave of the delight of existence, which takes on to our mental experience these apparently opposite tints, trick of false reception in our divided being, which is not our existence at all, but only a fragmentary formulation or discolored spray of conscious force tossed up by the infinite sea of our self-existence. In order to realize this, we have to get away from our absorption in these surface habits, these petty tricks of our mental being. And when we do get behind and away from them, it is surprising how superficial they are. What ridiculously weak and little penetrating pinpricks they prove to be. And we have to realize true existence and true consciousness and true experience of existence and consciousness. Sat, Chit and Ananda. So I've read a whole portion of this where he is discussing the issue of delight of consciousness existence and what is this undelight. So the first thing is using the analogy of the previous. There is a surface layer. And in that surface layer, you have the experience of misery, grief, pain, absence of delight. It's a surface wave of what? Of the delight of existence, which takes mental experience these apparently opposite tints because of a certain trick of false reception in our divided being. Now, in sum, the logic explaining to us of how this happens. So we need to look at this in a little more detail. If you had to explain this here in this text, of course, it would take many more pages if you want to fully elaborate it. So we'll just explore a little bit, enough to convince ourselves of what he's saying and the truth of it. So let's take first the body who's unhappy. If you observe carefully, when you're unhappy, something inside you wants to wallow in the unhappiness. You first remain self-absorbed. You're only thinking of yourself. Miserable. You're thinking how miserable you're feeling. Somehow that makes you more miserable and makes you feel important. I am so miserable. There's nobody in the world who's more miserable than I. Somewhere that's the implication. After a while, when you've had it long enough, you get bored, you get tired. The drama is the maximum it has reached. Now you turn to the person next to you. You look at him, that guy is smiling, he's happy. Oh, this fellow, he has no idea. And this strange conflict. If it's a friend, or if I can't stand it, I call up a friend I'm going through the worst period of my life. I'm so miserable. I'm so unhappy. And the person says, okay, listen, you're fine. Don't worry. It'll pass. No, you don't understand. Let me tell you. And I start narrating my misery in great detail. And if he doesn't have time, I go to someone else. It's a form of wallowing in self-pity, exaggerating the sense of self-importance. And Mother points to the core of this. She says, it is a form of an extreme egoism. You're so self-obsessed, only thinking about yourself and feeling good about feeling bad. This is the key. You're enjoying the state of being miserable. But the enjoyment is not on the surface. The enjoyment is behind the miserable condition. Something inside says, oh yeah, a little more, or there's not enough. So that part which is enjoying it is at a layer behind, but that is a perverse enjoyment. If you were to go behind that, so the perversion we will see shortly how it happens, but if you were to go behind that, you're happy to be alive. You're happy to exist. And the misery is an exaggerated distortion of existence. I exist, but my normal existence is too bland, and when I make myself miserable, it acquires an edge, a drama, a passion, which makes it somehow more interesting. And that's the perversion that it takes. If it takes a healthy form, the same person would say, oh, it's such a beautiful day. I'm so happy to be happy. So, in between, what brought about this distortion, he says, is merely a surface wave. First, notice it's a surface wave. To our mental experience, it is this, takes on this apparently opposite tints because of a certain trick of false reception in our divided being. So, our internal being is divided into so many parts. One part comes forward, it's misery. Another part uses that as a way for justifying its existence or its self-importance. It can be a little more complex when we look at the larger being. It's as if my misery is the result of somebody else benefiting. I lost all this, somebody else gained. But if my identity included that other in myself, I would not have the same misery. I have often used this example. When somebody steals my favorite family heirloom, he stole it in the middle of the night. I'm miserable. I've lost it. I should have been careful. I think of a million things I could have done to have protected it and not have allowed it to be stolen so easily or whatever. But now the thief who has just got it is so happy. He's got something which is so precious, so beautiful. He came to steal all the way and has been worth it. The risk of all this danger involved in stealing is worth it for what he has got. Let's say a couple of months down the line, my daughter comes home and says she wants to marry this young man, and I accept he's my son-in-law, and then I discover he's the one who had stolen my goods. You see the shift in the relationship. Oh, it's gone to you. It'll now go to my grandchildren. My family heirloom is back in my family. Suddenly that whole misery is gone. Okay, it's a bit of an exaggerated situation, but the idea being, it's the sense of I and not I. When something goes outside the not I, and it is no more in my limited small I, then I weep over it. When my I widens to include all things, I can call truly misery. If my I widens into time, not only in space, then even the cycles of birth and death. Somebody passed away who was close to me, they are now in the subtle. And at some point, they take birth again and we will meet again in physical body. Or when I leave my body, we will meet in the subtle worlds. And the whole sense of grief over death changes. Notice what happens when you grieve Somebody has died. You're unhappy. And I say, why? Oh, I will never meet him again. I will never meet him. I will not enjoy the time I had. I will not be. You grieve for what you have lost, not for their transition. You don't say, I'm unhappy that he cannot eat good food anymore. Right? In fact, perhaps he can eat better food in the subtle worlds. But it's about I. And strangely enough, it may be a relative that I never bothered to phone, that I never met, and suddenly they have died, and suddenly I have this loss. It's as if a part of me has gone out, and I'm grieving that. It's not even about the other person. But if my identity included all these on those levels, oh, they've shifted levels, they will come back. It's as simple as that. So the sense of misery, grief, pain, absence of delight is a surface wave and belongs to a consciousness which is narrow, defining itself in narrow terms, but it is supported by something else which is never experiencing these things. Wave, a surface wave of the delight of existence, which to our mental experience, again narrowing the band further, allows for this divided condition which creates a sense of duality. What's good for me is bad for another, what's bad for me may be good for another, and that sort of division. A certain trick of false reception in our divided being. Now the false reception is something more subtle. What we can take to understand this double layer is when we look at a human being playing a role in a play. And it is a play of pathos, a tragedy, and the lead actor, who shedding tears, with intense passion, he speaks of the great loss. And as that passion overwhelms him, his acting is so wonderful. Deep inside, he exults in the joy of a. And the audience, weeping with his, deep inside, they exult in the joy of that performance. And when the performance ends, the curtains drop, comes forward to take his bow, you get up and clap in a standing ovation of joy. He bows down with joy, a perfect performance of grief, which moved us so deeply that we are happy deeply. You notice the nature of this grief, even when intense, even moving us deeply, corresponds to only a surface part of our being. The joy that we had of the performance is of a much deeper character. Joy underlines all of life, irrespective of what happens on the surface. And that particular is not a normal emotional joy. That's why he does not use happiness. He uses delight, much more deep, much more essential, which does not have contraries, happiness versus sadness. And it is a delight which is so deep, it is the delight of existence. Because it is. That's where the delight exists. So now when we look at the whole big picture, when you exist, you're conscious. There's no such thing as unconsciousness. It's just different consciousness. When you exist, you're conscious. When you're conscious, your experience of your consciousness, of your existence is delight. Deep inside. There can be surface waves, and in the surface waves in a divine consciousness, the mind registering can give it the sense. Now you notice in animals where the mind is not distinctly formed, they do not have the same sense of misery, grief. Pain, yes, but only in the moment, not pain from past things. They experience pain, they move away. It passes and they are in the moment enjoying what next happens. It is only when the animal becomes more sophisticated, having a mental consciousness, and with it a crossing of across time and space, and a sense of personality and the possibilities which could have been, which could not be. That's when the judgment and the sense of grief and pain starts. If I'm not aware that things could have been different, I just feel the moment's pain, I move on. I don't have the grief. Grief is because something in me thinks, I wish it had taken that form, but now it took this form by the loss in my conception of what I think should have been or could have been, is where the grief starts. We see in very sophisticated animals, a baby elephant weeping when its mother has died, killed by poachers. Or when a child elephant has died, you'll see the whole herd standing for days together. They will not eat, they will not drink. You can feel their sadness. They turn away and then they move on. Because they're so developed, they're so conscious, they see the sense of possibilities that should not have been or could have been different. Was this sense of unhappiness. So a trick of false reception that says this and not that. But what if you could see more deeply? What if you could see that this passage was inevitable? Or if you could see that through this passage, something much greater? Then in that widened perception, you would say, yes, it's a painful passage, I know, but in the end result, it will be worth it. It is in this sense that we tend to accept losses in times of war. Such people died to save your country, to save your life, to protect your freedom, and we celebrate them. We celebrate their death in a perverse way, with honor. That they themselves willingly give up their life, which is so much grander that the loss of their individual life is as if worthwhile. Something of this happens when a group of soldiers bonds intensely. They go into battle and suddenly they're surrounded. The only way they can survive is if one person stays till the last, the enemy from entering this passage while the others escape, and he's sure to die. What do you expect happens? Nobody says, not me, not me. Everybody says, me, me, me. How do you explain that? And psychologically, based on the ego consciousness, you cannot explain it. Of course, you could speak of a larger group ego, but still, there's something which comes forward aside, individual comfort and discomfort, even life. For what? Something greater, which is himself, his own fulfillment, his own greatness in a way. And protect themselves is to save himself, his country, and he accepts to do that. And so when we shift our, begin to see larger, begin to see wider, you will find very few things may offer to you the same sense of personal misery or grief or pain or absence of delight. And now whatever is there is only part of a superficial appearance of things. And this divided consciousness which sees or feels grief, etc., is not our existence at all, but only a fragmentary formulation. The grief, etc., is also a fragmentary formulation, a discolored spray of conscious force tossed up by the infinite sea of our self-existence. This is the experience when seen most deeply. The whole universe is like an ocean bursting out in the foam of delight. All events, all circumstances are as if waves. All individuals and experiences are like drops thrown up, playing, forming. As they emerge, you're born. As they subside, but it's all part of one delight. It takes different forms and plays in colors. We've taken all these examples of misery, grief, pain. Especially physical pain is something which we need to touch upon also to fully appreciate. He's used all these words. Pain is when something hurts you, which causes you a discomfort. Increased, the discomfort becomes overwhelming. And Sri Aurobindo explains in The Lifetime how the sense of pain is only a distorted form of something else. If you observe carefully, what is it that causes pain? Anything that threatens your sense of separate identity. The extent that your sense of separate identity is fragile, a small prick creates pain. But if your sense of identity is large and wide, the same prick experienced as even pleasurable or just an experience. You can meet it in any way you choose. And this you will see when children play and the play becomes rough because they're carried away by the intensity of the play. You're playing football, you kick the ball hard. The same child, if he was told to kick the ball without a game, he will say, oh, it hurts my foot. The ball is hard. Every time I hit it, it causes pain on my foot, right? But in the midst of the game, the kick does not register as a pain anymore. It's a joy to be able to kick and push the ball to its goal. And somehow that becomes the prime focus. They're moving, they bump their arms against each other, they scratch, they hurt themselves, and they've enjoyed the game. They come back and they look, oh yeah, I seem to have crashed myself. It's bleeding. I didn't even notice it. There was no sensation of pain. When the level of energy increases or the state of excitement rises, the same thing becomes pleasurable. Even the energy drops, the level of excitement drops, the same thing becomes pain. So pain is really or pain pleasure are dualities when two things meet and make contact of sensation. If one gets overwhelmed by the other, it experiences pain. If the same contact assists the individual form to grow, it becomes pleasurable. So you caress me, pleasurable. I feel good, I feel cared for, I feel loved. But when you caress me, your nails scratching my skin, ouch, that hurts because it's damaging my sense of I. But if my skin was thick as the elephant's, you can scratch with the nails. It was itching there, now I feel relief with the same nails. So these are all relative terms, relative only to your capacity to receive the intensity of the contact of the universe. So Sri Aurobindo shows how if your consciousness opens out and embraces the totality of the universe and has the full energy to receive that entire impact, every contact in the universe is a contact of not pain, pleasure, delight. Embrace of yourself, meeting yourself. And when such a consciousness develops within us, the yogi finds he can go through any experience, however normally uncomfortable, without feeling discomfort. In fact, through that discomfort, he feels, and there's a beautiful sonnet Sri Aurobindo writes, the touch of Sri Krishna, the delight of the divine contact. There are many diary notes you will find in Sri Aurobindo's record of yoga, where he actually discusses how this capacity grows in him in the early stages of his sadhana. He can walk on barefoot on stone which has been heated by the midday sun. And either there is no discomfort or there is even that touch of the delight, depending on the degree of the development in the physical consciousness. All these, misery, grief, pain, absence of delight, are merely surface wave of the underlying delight of existence. In order to realize this, we have to get away from our absorption in these surface habits, these petty tricks of our mental being. And so this is the thing to be done. If you want to, all this we have understood. We have validated through certain experiences we have in certain extreme situations. But if you want to live in this reality, that everything is waves of an underlying delight of existence, we have to get away from our absorption in these surface habits. What are the surface habits? Precisely these experiences. Every time something knocks on me, this is painful. Every time someone insults me, oh, I feel unhappy because I'm not loved, etc. Notice what happens when you grow up. As children, somebody took my name and distorted it, and I felt miserable. someone distorts my name, I say, what, are you still a kid? It doesn't affect me somehow. The values have shifted so much. I don't identify myself as my name. As a kid, somebody criticizes me saying, oh, you have short hair. I go home crying. I grow. Oh, you have long hair. I go home crying because I cannot meet their expectation. What am I expecting? I want them to accept me as I am. I want them to love me as I am. I want them to appreciate whatever my length of hair or beard or whatever my height or whatever it is that's bothering me. And you'll see, especially when people come into their sense of I, how much time they spend on these issues. If I don't wear this kind of dress, if I don't have that kind of an object, if I don't use the right kind of makeup or speak the right words, disown me or not like me or laugh at me, or why my identity depends on what they think of me. But having gone further into life somehow, I don't care what people think. I'm happy to be and do what I am. What changed in that? In the first stage, you had a false sense of I, which was constructed by others' views and a superficial identity. In the second case, I am more conscious of me deeply. I don't need an external reference. So in order to realize this, we have to get away from our absorption in these surface habits, these petty tricks of our mental being. And when we do get behind and away from them, it is surprising how superficial they are. And this we do as adults. We look back at our childhood. You used to cry because of this. Oh, it's so funny. Your child now cries because of this, and you tell him, oh, don't worry, you'll grow up. It does not matter. It's nothing. And the child says, Papa, you don't understand. It is my life. And Papa says, I do understand. I've been through exactly the same thing, and you outgrow it. It is surprising how superficial they are. And the same thing now extends into all these experiences of misery, grief, pain, absence of delight. And what ridiculously weak and little penetrating pinpricks they prove to be. And this, of course, when you have gone deep enough and you experience the whole world as the body of divinity playing at infinite possibilities, everything is an opportunity to play deeper delight. Even the challenges, even the dangers of self-loss, even the most extreme attacks. When you widen and deepen your consciousness enough, you can look at it and say, this is such an interesting experience. So many possibilities open up from here. What a surprise, what an adventure. So, when we get away from our mental being, and we have to realize our true existence, deep within, our true consciousness, and the true experience of existence and consciousness. So what do you experience when you look at your own consciousness? What do you experience when you look at your own existence? And that is the delight, and the delight of existence. Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Now, having set this as the broad framework, he now begins to describe what is the nature of this Chit, and in what way it relates to our surface consciousness and all the gradations within our consciousness. This again brings us to a very fascinating discussion where he will show you layer by layer gradations of consciousness and how over the whole development of our evolution, each phase is active within us. And they are all as if reduced representations of something which is more fundamental, more complete, more free, and more true. That's the nature of the Chit. And so we will take up that paragraph next time, which will be next Friday. The coming Sunday and the next Sunday, we will have to skip our study of the Kena Upanishad because I will have to go out of station on both Sundays. But we will continue this text on Friday and continue the Kena Upanishad on the Sunday after. For those who are interested, there will be a video of some other classes or lectures which might be of interest and which will help to maintain continuity of our study. So I'll pause here and we can take up any questions or comments. It's a fascinating exploration.
It's really fascinating. It will really, you know, I know I've been making this observation that this instrument called computer, which is computer developed, can be the biggest enemy and your biggest friend also.
What's the relation with this?
The computer,
Yes, but why are you saying that?
because it is bringing us in one consciousness of ourselves more and more, because it's becoming very sensational.
Mhm.
And because of the sensations and because of this program by some other not your original, getting addicted, and you're not acting like your original.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
at the same time, it's your friend also, because it's providing you so many facilities
Okay.
and amenities also.
Okay, so I'll actually take the observation to a more general level. Not just computers, but all of our communication technologies which involve some intelligence and some greater possibilities of connection and communication, they have an addictive element embedded through them, because it is as if they expand the narrow scope of your senses. While right now I'm limited to the things I can see around me through the television screen, through the video chat, I'm able to see things which are far away. A friend on the other side of the world can show me through their phone camera the scene in nature where they're going on a hike at the top of a mountain. And it's possible as if my own consciousness is projecting out there and seeing things beyond the range of my immediate senses. Or when I chat with somebody through the computer screen, I'm engaging in conversation with several people at the same time on several levels even, and across space and time. And all of these are experiences which are rich, that they have also a character of being addictive. And yes, if you get hooked on it, you become another somnambulist now of a more complex character. If you can stand back from it and wield it, then there are means of acting on a much wider scale in space and time and relationships.
You mentioned that, for example, some drugs can affect
Mhm.
the level all of the base different awareness.
Mhm.
So my question is somebody, for example, is receiving treatment on today,
Yes.
for example,
Yes.
on a terminal,
Yes.
terminal state, what level of awareness these treatments is taking this person?
Mhm.
That is
Yes. So today, many of the drugs which were earlier banned are being considered for their medical uses, and especially for people in terminal illnesses to alleviate. But also, we notice certain drugs not only alleviate pain, they bring a greater sense of calm. They remove the sense of imminence of danger and fear. And mostly they are done by empirical observation. This drug had a beneficial effect that exaggerated the symptoms, so you avoid it. But if one were to look at it from a deeper yogic and psychospiritual perspective, one would be able to recognize what are the levels of consciousness that the drug opened you to, which ones opened you to higher levels of your own possibilities, and which ones provoked lower instincts and impulses. And thus we would be able to select more carefully. But really that happens through empirical observation. I personally am not familiar with, I've seen those studies, but I have not bothered to remember names of which are helpful for what kind of terminal illness conditions. But I have seen one study, which has perhaps more obvious relevance here. People in terminal illnesses or people even in extreme pain who were given medicines to alleviate pain, And then a separate group was taught meditation to alleviate pain. And what they found was the pain alleviation through meditation was equal in result to pain alleviation through medication. Equal, not slightly equal. And effectively, that one study shows that in principle, if you choose, you can completely get rid of the medicines and manage it purely by a deepened and freed inner consciousness, in principle. There are other studies which show things like religious people are able to handle those painful situations more easily. Why? Because they have access to something which is an inner help. Again? Yes. Yes. There was a time when it was common for many creative artists, writers, to use opium or some other drugs to kickstart their inspiration. Now, what happens with some of, depending on the drugs and the dosage, it removes the barriers of the consciousness which would open you to a wider universality. Of what level? The live or to which you have developed. Okay? So even drugs which open you access to a more mental consciousness than a vital consciousness, of course it's always mixed. Even those, if your mind is undeveloped or is not in a higher aspiring for idealistic turn, it would simply open you to the lower grades of the mental consciousness and you would just find yourself bound into that. So it's not in itself the drug, but the innate grade of consciousness and evolution and development to which the drugs gave a certain widened access. And so many of these writers found their creativity enormously increased. But if they were at a lower grade of consciousness, they got an equally exaggerated increase of very low grade in quality of consciousness, but intense expressions of their art or music or whatever form it was. From a spiritual perspective, though, none of these would be too helpful because the access that you want cannot be given purely by the drugs. What can happen is you have within yourself a higher spiritual potential and the drug momentarily dulls the clouding layer in between and that potential is momentarily exposed. But having had that once, the person will no more need the drug because now he's aware of that own higher part of himself and the rest follows. Yes. Yes, yes, yes.
Shiva has also got anger. Where
Yes. So the example he's given is when Sita was abducted, even Rama as a divine avatar felt grief. And Sri Aurobindo's comment on that is simply this: when an avatar takes on a human body and human nature, he is to that degree subject to that human nature also. And so he will face all those human experiences. The question is, what does he do with that experience? And to what extent he is able to rise above the entanglement of that experience in order to take a decision which is greater than himself. And we find in the life of Rama consistently, whatever may be his personal comfort or unhappiness over something, he rises above personal choice and sets the standard for an ideal for humanity, the ideal of the civic mind, and chooses to assert that higher value in spite of facing conflicts on lower levels. So that's the standard he sets. But there's another side to this question. We are not avatars. So within us, well, in a sense, we are all avatars. We are all divine beings taking a human experience. There's another side to this experience, that to the consciousness, to the soul, which is essentially divine, there are elements of the human experience which are fascinating. And it wants to wallow in them for a while before moving on. If you've ever observed a child, he suddenly falls, bumps his leg, and for a moment he's stunned, he looks around. And if at that moment the adults remain very quiet and smile, the child smiles. If at that time the adults jump up, oh, what happened to you? The child looks, stares, and starts crying. He's as if reflecting your expectation that he should be unhappy. Okay? I've equally seen children, they fall, they cry a little bit from the pain, and then they notice this observation, they observe this crying experience. Strange, it feels strange, and suddenly now everybody's giving me a lot of attention, and they look at you and enter deeper into the crying wah sound. And after a while, the adults move away, look around, nobody's looking at me. Again, he shouts, screams. As he's making the sound louder and louder, something in him is saying, hey, I can make it louder, and he goes a little more. It's as if something inside is enjoying that new experience. I can do this. It's similar to an adult. You know, when you've just got a certain skill, you want to play with it a little more. Oh yeah, I can do this. After a while, of course, that passes and you move on. Something like that happens in the human experience. The experience of pathos, the experience of deception, the experience of surprise, the experience of fear, worry, uncertainty, adventure, loss. Certain, at the back, a delight, that form of the human experience. And so that part of the inner being chooses to wallow in it for a while. On the outer nature, of course, that wallowing may lead to a habit or some pattern which eventually one has to struggle to get free of. But the soul may choose to play with that for a while. So we know of many cases where beings went through that whole development, passed through all those experiences, and when it was ready, the inner being said, okay, now I have to get on with my mission. It pushes forward, and suddenly you find the whole person has an extraordinary maturity. All these experiences are now his past, and a new phase begins. But till then, he had to pass through those experiences, if nothing else, for a full development of the personality, but more often because having gone through them, he can understand how others experience, and is able to help them more effectively. Mother observes that the greater your inner potential, the more the difficulties you face in life, precisely because they help to shape and draw out the fullness of that potential and bring it to its greatest intensity and perfection. And something inside accepts that, or even chooses that line of development. So there is a double layer of awareness in all of us. The surface part of us is not conscious of the inner. The inner is conscious of the outer and may accept and play with it freely.
Conclusion that we are at present in this state, a state of our habits which we have accumulated over past several lives and continually dust after dust after dust. And then
Yes. Not only we are slave of the habits of many lives, as we will see in the next paragraph, we are slave of the habits of all the levels of our evolution, including our animal past, which still continues in us as grades of consciousness. And all of that is still in us. The next paragraph actually explores some of those levels. And he makes us conscious of how we are not just this mental awareness, but all those other gradations simultaneously pulling and pushing all these. That's the nature of our, what we call individual personality. And that's what creates the great complexity. But the levels of consciousness, all the way to the mind, will give you a hint of what it is, all the way to the beyond the mind, to the true nature of the Chit, the pure consciousness. of Satchidananda. So it'll be a fascinating discussion, which we will take up next Friday. Oh.